I think this presentation will be like a very different one from what you've heard, Nothing Scientist. It's effectively around the policy environment in which we operate and providing this perspective from a commercial manufacturer that we are. I work at Miltenyi Biomedicine, so not biotech, but it's a part of the family. And I'll try to, help you navigate the environment in which we need to operate. First, something which is maybe obvious, but we operate in an environment which is highly politicized, with many stakeholders from international, national, European institutions, patients, academics, payers, a lot of competing health priorities from rare disease, cancer, antibiotic resistance, for instance, but limited budgets. And Carlos mentioned it. I mean, we heard that around access issues, availability across Europe, issues for innovative treatments, questions around affordability, around unmet need, is the research that we do, is the innovation that we bring the right one in line with unmet needs. How do we value that innovation, and other issues around shortages that we've seen after COVID or during COVID, competitiveness and attractivity of Europe. So many issues which are also evolving. It's quite complex. It's sometimes incoherent as well. So we have policies which are in conflict of each other, and it doesn't help. Saying that, many initiatives have been already initiated in Brussels. I come from the EU policy side, but also there are lots at national level. But and there are calls for revisions of EU and national laws. So around IP, intellectual property, we've heard a lot around waivers of patents, compulsory licensing, calls for more transparency around drug pricing, but also around the cost of R&D. Who pays for the R&D at the end, and do we pay twice as payers? Calls for modulating incentives, so reducing at the end the rewards that the industry is getting when receiving marketing authorization, in line with the real unmet need that this drug brings. Of course, equal access across Europe, because Carlos showed it, like in many countries in Europe, there is no access to many of these drugs. Calls for joint procurement, and also important, again, because of COVID, reshoring of medicines, but also raw materials, starting materials. How can we secure access to this innovation if we don't have the capacity to manufacture it here in Europe and rely on other geographies? So these are very important political drivers of what we see in the legislation changes. And of course, any legislation that we get, I think that's obvious for many, but it's a compromise. So it will never please everybody. It's the result of many diverging interests. And it's as it is. It's never, that good. Anyway, we already had a revision of the EU pharmaceutical framework. So I will cover a bit later, like this. There is a new regulation around EU HTA. Actually, it looks only at the clinical part of it. It's joint clinical assessment that companies like ours are obliged to follow as of 2025. There is this new legislation around substances of human origin, that revised blood directive tissue engineering, which has been published in 2024, so this year. And there is the revision of the pharma legislation, which means the pharma directive, regulation, the orphan drugs, and the pediatric legislations. It's at this stage at the Council. It was adopted by the Parliament, and I'll come with you. I will review with you some of the important, I would say, aspects that what has been changed in the legislation that relate to CGT. But of course, there are many other initiatives like the EMA pilot, everything around health data, the EU health data space, the EU beating cancer plan. I mean, there are many other issues. It's just non-exhaustive, but it's just a snapshot. So, second part is what are the main policy changes when we are, as commercial operators, when we seek marketing authorization, and specifically targeting CGTs. Many of them are general, but I'll try to twist that for CGTs. Mostly articulated around regulatory policy, market access policy, but also competitiveness changes. It's just a snap, again, like it's not comprehensive or exhaustive list of regulations and laws. But here you see for ATMPs, of course, we have the ATMP legislation that covers gene therapies, cell somatic therapies, tissue engineering. But we also have the pharma legislation, orphan drug pediatric medicines, that is for general medicines. And we also have in this field like the SOO, so substance of human origins, the GMO regulation that also has some impact for us, clinical trials, and for Miltenyi Biotech, it's obvious, but medical device is also important. So we have to take account of like a multitude of different policies, legislations, which bring complexity, some level of unpredictability, because it's not easy to navigate. And I heard a lot around red tape and administrative burden and time that people have to spend. I mean, it's true for the academics, but it's also true, obviously, for commercial operators. Different changes, just to take the example of GMO, the GMO requirements applying to ATMPs, borderline products for SOO and ATMPs, and where is the delineation? What role will the EMA have? I mean, there are still some open issues. And for the pharmaceutical legislation, which are these, I don't know if that works, the darker puzzle pieces, pharma, orphan, and pediatric, it covers and revises a lot of aspects that relate to the marketing authorizations, from the timeline, from the eligibility to the prime scheme at EMA, the priority medicine. Revise the structure of EMA with changes when it comes to the comp, to the CAT, etc. It revised the incentives. I mentioned the rewards that companies get when it comes to regulatory data protection, orphan market exclusivity after marketing authorization. Revise and provides definition of what is a not met medical need. And that opens a lot of questions. Now, related to CGTs, there are quite interesting new pieces here. One is the regulatory sandbox. The other one is introduction of decentralized manufacturing as part of legislation. There is also revision of the GMO aspects and hospital exemption. So if you allow me, I'll go through these four elements, and you can see what are the changes in the legislation. Decentralized manufacturing, I don't think I need to repeat what has been covered before, and I think understood what is the difference with central manufacturing. It's interesting because it's now included in the legislation, so it's a strong recognition of the fact that the manufacturing and testing of ATMPs may need to take place in sites close to patients. There are guidelines, but also it limits the obligation to obtain only one manufacturing authorization for the central site. There are obligations, obviously, for the central sites when it comes to control, audits, etc. But it's actually quite easier, I would say, than what was at this stage in the text. Regulatory sandboxes, it's a new regulatory pathway that is introduced to test and create innovative products and technologies when there is no other way or other legislative pathway that exists. So, for instance, we mentioned point of care. It's not only for products, it's also for technology and could be used to test point of care manufacturing. So that's the pictogram that associated with that. Revision of the GMO requirements, simplification, harmonization of the environmental risk assessment. There is no systematic exemption of ATMPs from the GMO requirements, like we've seen during the COVID and the development of the vaccines. Nevertheless, there's still the recognition that key articles of the legislation, so here we speak about Contained Use Directive and Derivative Release Directive, will not apply to medicinal products containing or consisting of genetically modified organisms. So it's not all the CGTs, but it's some of them, and that applies to these aspects: supply, clinical use, packaging, labeling, distribution, etc., until administration, destruction, and disposal. So it should make it easier. And finally, hospital exemption. So it's in many parts, but mainly the Article 2 of the revised directive. There is no change of the definition itself. It's still non-routine, hospital-based, under responsibility of practitioners, medical practitioners. It's the scope for the manufacturing has been extended to hospital pharmacists as well. That's a new thing, and still for individual patients. There is no definition of non-routine in the text, which was introduced at some point in the Parliament. Anyway, it will be developed under further guidelines implementing acts. As I said, the hospital pharmacist is included in the scope now. There are some additional data requirements, reporting data requirements, long-term follow-up on quality, safety, and efficacy, with a repository that will be made public around these data. And there is also a strengthened cross-border exchange of hospital exemption products being introduced, allowing for cross-border, as it means, exchange of hospital exemption products from one country to another in certain cases, justified cases. So I think also something that would be interesting for you or some of you, that the new study from the Commission on hospital exemption will be published in November. And there is a meeting that is expected on that time, on 21st of November in Brussels by the Commission. Timeline for the revised legislation. We don't expect the text to be implemented or enter into force before 2028. It's now in the Council, meaning that the Ministers of Health basically discuss the different elements that were adopted by the Parliament and have a negotiation between the Council, the Parliament and the Commission to agree on a compromise text that will form the basis of the final text. So what I've shown you before is what is coming from the Parliament. It doesn't take account of any amendments that could come from the Council. We understand that the Hungarian, who hold the presidency at the moment, would have political agreement with the rest of the Council to try to conclude the negotiations around the pharma legislation. So maybe that will go faster. But let's see, because the Hungarian government has some political issues, I would say, with the rest of Europe. Second element, market access policy. So yes, we can get the marketing authorization from the EMA and everything goes smoothly, but then we need to bring it to the market. We need to launch it and to agree on a price and reimbursement country by country. So there are a set of legislations and obligations that we need to go through, and one of them is the newly introduced joint clinical assessment, which is here on the bottom, EU HTA, GCA. We have 27 national pricing and reimbursement, and it's important to just look at that as, you know, additional, but also duplicative steps very often, but also incoherent discrepancies between what regulators on one hand have asked us to provide in terms of data during the clinical trial, etc., and what is required by payers, HTA authorities, and discrepancies also between what EU asks and countries ask, because all the countries don't look the same way as, for instance, in direct comparison. So the degree of acceptance of uncertainty varies from one country to another, and where the RCT, the randomized clinical trial with head-to-head comparison, is the gold standard, we can have, or we should have, real-world data, real-world evidence, data to come to some point and answer what will be requested as part of this GCA. So we'll get a request from all the member states about what are the data that they would like to see when compared to comparator X, Y, Z, etc. For the kind of outcomes that they would like to see compared to what we have in the clinical trial, and it's going to be quite a challenging task. We're going to fall, the ATMPs, oncology products, are the first one to go through this process that will start January next year. Actually, all the elements detailing the GCA are not developed because they are currently under development by the EU. So we are waiting, everybody's waiting for all the details. We don't know exactly everything. And the timeline is quite important because we only have 100 days to pull together a report that will answer all the requirements from the member states. And they will basically provide us with their requirements and 100 days to make the report. So it's quite short. That's it. And the other elements around market access policy that are important to flag, I would say, of course, budget impact. I mean, all the countries are not budget impact centric. Italy, for instance, is, but it's still an important element. But when we look at, on one hand, the difficulty to assess the value of cell and gene therapies, potentially curative, one-time treatment, and on the other hand, the siloed budgeting, which is very short-term and separated from other portfolio of the governments, we basically have a gap between that and the ability to assess CGT. So it's true for every drug, but I think it's more acute for cell and gene therapies. And for budget impact, today we are basically looking at rare disease, small population. So let's say, well, it's going to be fine, but what about next therapies that will address larger populations? So that will be quite a challenging time when we'll reach larger populations. And competitiveness issues, I mean, it's quite general here, but obviously we operate in an international environment. We hear, we see very well that most of the research and innovation in this field is not coming from Europe. So how do we maintain Europe as an attractive place for investment? When you have also incoherence between European and national priorities, and also from a policy standpoint, incoherence between what is industrial and research policies that basically aim at fostering innovation, at fueling investment in that area, and healthcare policies which are mainly driven by cost containment and pricing policies. So it's quite difficult to solve like that, but it's a difficult competitiveness environment. So what's next? And that the last slide. You know that we got the elections in June, and it means that we have a new European Commission, which is in the forming, I would say. A new European Parliament that has been elected and who starts working and has structured itself over the summer, which means that we have new strategic health priorities for the new mandate. And as part of that, there is an interesting one, which is around EU biomanufacturing initiative that was published in March 2024, and we'll have a European Biotech Act, which is important, recognizing the importance of the biotechnology sector for Europe and what it means for the competitiveness of Europe. So we're expecting that, and we should work on that together. That's basically what I would like to say, because it's going to be important to get it right. And also, for those who are interested about the good readings, the report of Mario Dari, which sets a tone of recommendations for Europe to be or stay competitive in the world. Otherwise, we'll basically continue to fall behind. Let's see what's going to be taken on board by Ursula von der Leyen and her commissioners. That's a new commission. In the circles are key commissioners: health, industry, and research. Health is Oliver Váradi from Hungary, appointed commissioner. Stéphane Séjourné is the French one for industry. And Ekaterina Zahareva is the commissioner for research. So important for you to consider. So that's the way they operate, and there are some connections between Váradi and Lahib, with the Belgian commissioner for health preparedness and health crisis. That's basically how it's structured. Strategic health priorities for the new mandate. So between now until 2029, the Commission will work on, as I said, like competitive and multiple issues that are, I would say, articulated around these NCDs, non-communicable disease, new industrial policy, and access, pricing, security. We see cancer, CVDs, rare disease. Beating Cancer Plan is continuing. Under industrial policy, I mentioned the European Biotech Act, which is expected next year. There is also a European Competitiveness Fund focusing on research and innovation that was announced in June by von der Leyen. All of that, we don't know the details, but normally there should be additional money fueled into that. And there is also a strong call for the medical device regulation by a big part of the European Parliament. And we all know that it's not going in, the implementation is not right and has led to many issues. And the Critical Medicine Act that I've basically flagged here is something which is going to be developed in order to respond to shortages and supply chain issues that we've seen in Europe, in order to stop relying on other countries, other geographies for APIs, raw materials, etc. What we hope is that it will include those raw materials, starting materials that we also need for CGTs, and not only focus on critical. Probably we'll start with paracetamol, etc., antibiotics, but potentially it will include CGTs. Draghi report, just to say here, and you don't need to read everything, it basically recognizes ATMP as a driver, or the sector as a driver of competitiveness for Europe. I think it's important to flag that as part of all the technologies and the areas that he recommends Europe should focus on, CGTs is part of it. And yeah, as I said, so let's work together on that in the next mandate. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for the great overview. Yeah, I cannot stop thinking how important it is to vote and elect competent politician in a European institution. I'd hope that this is going to work out this time. Any question? Oh, there. Microphone. I can bring. You can take that. Yes.
I take this one. Thank you very much for the very nice overview. My name is Thorsten Tonn, Frankfurt University Hospital, and also German Red Cross Blood Donation Service. I'd like to comment a little bit with regard to the hospital exemption. I agree with what you said for the European level, but on the other hand, in Germany, unfortunately, so it's not my situation which I prefer, but Germany, the authorities, Paul-Ehrlich Institute, in my view, see it a little bit different. Because it's not how it's interpreted very often. Hospital exemption is an exemption for hospitals so that the doctor can do what he believes is necessary for the patient. They see it more from a pharmaceutical act, and it's connected with the German Drug Act, Arzneimittelgesetz in German, paragraph 4b, Absatz 3. And there it states basically that pharmaceuticals usually have to always go through a pharmacy. You cannot, as a manufacturer, market medical drugs to a patient or hospital directly. You have to always go through a pharmacy. And the exemption is that for such things like ATMPs and things which are produced on a level which is not routine-based yet, they can go to the hospital directly. And this is the exemption for the hospitals. In order to apply for a hospital exemption, you still have to be more than just a doctor. You have to be some entity of something, but you do not have to be a hospital. And I truly hope that we get more alignment on a European level, because the very nice trial which has been shown from Spain earlier today would not be possible in Germany for two reasons. You would not receive a hospital exemption on this level, and also Paul-Ehrlich Institution, as far as I know, it may change. They do not see CAR T cells under a hospital exemption. They think they are so much manipulated, etc. They would need marketing authorization.
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree with you. I think that's one of the challenge with hospital exemption, but it is the interpretation and the very different degrees of interpretation that the member states have taken around hospital exemption, and that is actually a clear request that was made by Germany at the time when it was introduced in the legislation, that the countries remain the ones responsible for interpreting many aspects of that. So the harmonization, as I mentioned, like many of it are not, many of the elements are not introduced in the law, and this wide harmonization will probably not happen, because the member states, Spain, will remain the one responsible for the accreditation and the authorization at the end of the day. And the criteria will vary effectively from one country to another.